Yo, what's going on, snipers, and welcome to another Stanley Cup Finals rematch. So I know I said in last episode that I would be doing the 2003 finals or the 1997 finals. However, with certain circumstances, I decided to change my mind, and we're going to be doing the 1970 Stanley Cup Finals just because the fact that the Blues and the Bruins are going to be facing each other in the 2019 finals. So this finals is where the one where Bobby Orr scored probably the most iconic goal in NHL history when he beat Glenn Hall in overtime of game number 4. So first, before we get into the jerseys, the rosters, and the simulation, let's get into how each team got to this point. So the Bruins were led by some pretty big names, including Bobby Orr, Phil Esposito, Johnny Busick, and Jerry Shevers. However, the Bruins were still looking for the first Stanley Cup since 1941, as between and now it was mostly Montreal and Toronto taking home the cup. The Bruins did have actually a couple cup appearances in between then, but they lost all of them. In the first of 3 rounds, which would be the toughest task for the Bruins, they had to face the New York Rangers. The New York Rangers were led by guys like Walt His Suck, I think it's pronounced, and they were also led by like Jean Rattel, Eddie Jackman, those type of guys. Boston would take them out in 6 games and move to the second round against the Chicago Blackhawks. This round would be a battle of the Esposito brothers, as Phil would take on Tony, as Tony was the goaltender for the Blackhawks at this point in time. The Bruins would manage to sweep the Chicago Blackhawks, which was kind of a surprise because the Blackhawks finished just above the Bruins in the standings. Like, they had the same amount of points, but they had more wins. This would make the Bruins advance to their first Stanley Cup Finals appearance since 1958. Now the Blues, on the other hand, they made their 3rd straight Stanley Cup Finals appearances. They also played in 1968 and 69, but they lost both times to Montreal via sweeps. The 1970 playoffs, they would take on the Minnesota North Stars, who were led by J.P. Parise, who's the father of Zach Parise, in case you guys didn't know. St. Louis would take them out in 6 games and advance to the second round, where they would take on the Pittsburgh Penguins. Once again, they would take them out in 6 games and move on to the Stanley Cup Finals. Now, this Finals was actually pretty interesting. Despite Boston pulling off the sweep for the Stanley Cup, St. Louis was a very good defensive team during the regular season, as they finished second in the entire NHL, while Boston was mainly an offensive team, as they led the league in goals for, mainly due to Bobby Orr having like 120 points that season. Fortunate for the Bruins, Blues goaltender Jacques Plante was injured in the second period of game number 1 and would not play again that season. A slap shot hit him right in the mask and cracked it in half. That shot came in from Fred Stanfield. If he did not have that mask though, Jacques Plante would have probably been dead because of how hard the shot was, according to doctors. Boston would then run up the score in that game and win 6-1, and then they would also pretty much rout the rest of the series, beating goalies like Ernie Walkley, who played in game number 2 and the rest of game number 1, and then Glenn Hall played game 3 and 4. Okay, so now that you guys know how each team got there, now let's get into the uniforms for both teams, starting off with the Boston Bruins. So here are the home jerseys for the Boston Bruins. As you can see, they look pretty similar. They're not 100% accurate, but they do still look really good. I like these a lot better than their current jerseys by far. And the logo looks kind of cool too. And then their away jersey is pretty much just reversed in color. If you're wondering why the numbers on the side look brown, they're not actually brown. I put them as black, but for some reason they just show up as brown in this game. I don't know why. It's kind of weird, unless it's just on my television, it could be. So yeah, there is the jerseys for the Bruins. Now let's flip on over to the jerseys for the Blues. So here are the home jerseys for the St. Louis Blues. I really like these jerseys. Might be one of my favorite jerseys that I've ever created. It doesn't look 100% accurate, but the colors and all that should be pretty close. And then the away jersey is kind of different, and I don't really like this one as much, but it still looks good. Like, I feel like this one might have a bit too much yellow, but other than that, still a pretty solid jersey. So now that you guys have seen the jerseys, let's flip on over to the roster, starting off with the St. Louis Blues. Okay, so starting off for the St. Louis Blues, here on the left side, we have Abe McDonald, or Abe McDonald, I don't know how it's pronounced. Either way, he was 5th on the team in points during the regular season with 55 points in 64 games. And he also led the team in points during the playoffs with 15 points in 16 games. He was a pretty solid player all around for his career. Within 762 games, he put up 182 goals, 248 assists for 430 points. He was also a career plus 66 and had 198 penalty minutes. He actually passed away just kind of recently in September 2018 at the age of 82. At center here we have Phil Goyette, who took home the Lady Byng Trophy this season. He was a part of the Montreal Canadiens team that won the Stanley Cup from 1957 to 1960. Phil played 940 games over his career with 207 goals, 467 assists for 674 points. He was also a career plus 10 and had only 123 penalty minutes over that span. Despite being such a good player during his actual playing career, he was not the greatest coach, as he coached one season for the New York Islanders in 1972-73, and his team did pretty horrific, as his record as a coach was 6-38-4. On the right side here, we have Frank St. Marseille. During the regular season, Frank finished third on the team in points with 59 points in 74 games. Over his 707 game career, he had 140 goals, 285 assists for 425 points. He was also a career plus 32 and had 244 penalty minutes. His last season came in the 1976-77 season with the Los Angeles Kings, as he kind of started his NHL career kind of late at the age of 28. Now into the second line left wing, we have Larry Keenan, who had a short 233 game career. He would play in Toronto, Buffalo, and Philadelphia as well. Despite not having a long career, Keenan was decent, putting up 38 goals, 64 assists for 102 points. He was also a career minus 11 and had 28 penalty minutes, so he didn't really take a lot of penalty minutes over those 233 games he played. Larry was third on the team in points this postseason. Next at center here, we have a pretty cool hockey name, and that is Red Berenson. Red finished this season second on the team in points behind Phil Goyette with 72 points in 67 games, so he's over point per game. He led the team in goals with 33. Red was pretty good offensively, but he was a bit of a liability on his defensive end, as over 987 career games, he put up 261 goals, 397 assists for 658 points, but he was a career minus 124 and had 303 penalty minutes. He won one Stanley Cup with the Montreal Canadiens back in 1965. On the right side here, we have Tim Esselstone, or Ecclestone, I don't know how it's pronounced, but he was the youngest player on this team at the age of 22. Over his 692 game career, Tim scored 126 goals, added 233 assists for 359 points. He was also a career plus 20 and had 344 penalty minutes. He also played with the Detroit Red Wings, the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Atlanta Flames. Now on the wing here, we have Terry Crisp, who won 2 Stanley Cups in 1974 and 75 with the Broad Street Bullies, aka the Philadelphia Flyers. Terry also played in Boston and with the New York Islanders. Over his 536 game career, he had 67 goals, 134 assists for 201 points. He was also a career plus 37 and had 135 penalty minutes, so he was more of like a two-way kind of bottom six forward for the most part. He was also an NHL coach with the Calgary Flames and the Tampa Bay Lightning. He actually was the coach for the 1989 Calgary Flames that went on to win the Stanley Cup. At center here, we have the late Andre Boudreau, or Boudreas, I don't know how it's pronounced. It's probably Boudreau because he's from Quebec, but the commentators in the video I was watching said Boudreas, so either or. Anyways, he passed away just recently in February at the age of 75. Andre played 662 career games, scoring 151 goals and adding 340 assists for 491 points. He was also a career minus 56 and had 216 penalty minutes. His best years of his career came when he was in Vancouver from 1970-71 to 1975-76. On the right side here, we have Gary Sabourin, who finished third on the team in goals with 28. Over his career, he played 627 games, scoring 169 goals, adding 188 assists for 357 points. He was also a career minus 7 and had 397 penalty minutes. After he left St. Louis in 1974, he would play in Toronto, California, and Cleveland over a 3-year span, so he was basically playing with one of those teams each year. On the left wing here on the fourth line, we have Bill McCreary Sr., who is the father of Bill McCreary Jr., who was an NHL player for a short bit, but most notably as an NHL referee. If you guys remember him, he used to be a referee until 2011. Bill Sr. also had a brother named Keith McCreary, who played in the NHL for 532 games. And he also had some other relations, including his nephew Ron Atwell and his grandnephew Bob Atwell, who also had short stints in the NHL. Like, they both played like 22 games, so nothing extravagant. But then again, that's still better than his son Bill McCreary Sr., who only played like 12 games. Anyways, Bill McCreary Sr. played 309 games with 53 goals, 62 assists for 115 points. He was also a career plus 19 and had 106 penalty minutes. So once again, more of a bottom six kind of guy. On the fourth line center here, we have Norm Dennis, who played only 2 playoff games this season, and he did not play that much at all in his NHL career. Norm had a super brief career that only lasted 12 NHL games and 5 playoff games. In his 12 regular season games, he had 3 goals, was a career -4 and had 11 penalty minutes. While playoff-wise, he never had a single point, and he did have one single penalty. To wrap up the dressed forwards, we have Terry Gray. Terry had also a pretty short career that only lasted 147 games. Over that span, he had 26 goals, 28 assists for 54 points. He was also a career -31 and had 62 penalty minutes. He also played for Boston, Montreal, and Los Angeles. Now onto our only depth forward, and that is Ron Anderson, who only played 59 games during this regular season with 18 points. This playoff run, he only played one game. Ron was actually more of a physical player than a point producer, as in 251 games, he scored 28 goals, added 30 assists for 58 points. He was also a career -29 and had 146 penalty minutes. He also played for Detroit, LA, and Buffalo. Now into the defensive core here, we have Jean-Guy Talbot, who won 7 Stanley Cups over his NHL career, which actually ties him for 8th all-time in Cup wins. All 7 of those Cups came in Montreal from 1956 to 1960 and 1965 to 1966. Jean-Guy played 1,066 career games, scoring 43 goals, adding 242 assists for 285 points. He was also a career +122 and had 1,014 penalty minutes. He would make the All-Star game 6 times in his career. On his right side here, we have the captain of the St. Louis Club, and that being Al Arbour, who passed away back in 2015. He was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame as a builder in 1996. Al won 3 Stanley Cups, including 1 with Chicago in '61, and then 2 with Toronto in '62 and '64. Al was pure a defensive defenseman, as he laced up 626 games, scoring 12 goals, adding 58 assists for 70 points. He was also a career +62 and had 611 penalty minutes, so he was pretty physical, despite wearing glasses, which is kind of surprising because you'd think he wouldn't fight really with glasses on unless those glasses actually helped save his face, because you know how thick those glasses were back in those days. Finally, Al Arbour was also a really good coach. He is 5th all-time in wins by a coach with 782. Now in the top 4 pairing, we have the first of the 3 Plager brothers, that is Barclay. Barclay was a very physical defenseman, but also had some good offense and defensive skill. He played 614 NHL games with 44 goals, 187 assists for 231 points. He was also a career +61 and had 1,115 penalty minutes. He passed away in 1988 at the age of 46. His defense partner is Jimmy Roberts, who, like Talbot, was pretty successful. Jimmy won 5 Cups in his career, all with Montreal in 1965 and 66, and then after his stint in St. Louis in 73, 76, and 77. He kind of bounced around actually between St. Louis and Montreal, because he started his career in Montreal, then went to St. Louis, then went back to Montreal, and then I think he ended it off in St. Louis again. Jimmy played 1,006 games with 126 goals, 194 assists for 320 points. He was also career +136 and had 623 penalty minutes. Now in the top 6 pairing, we have the second of the 3 Plager brothers. This one is Bob. Bob was like his brother Barclay in terms of physicalness and all that. Bob played 645 games, scoring 20 goals, adding 126 assists for 146 points. He was also a career +18 and had 800 penalty minutes. And the final dressed defenseman we have here is the one that tripped Bobby Orr, and that is Noel Picard. Noel was a physical player that played 336 games with 12 goals, 63 assists for 75 points. He was also a career +5 and had 614 penalty minutes, so he was taking like a penalty game basically. Noel won a cup in 1965 with the Montreal Canadiens. Now onto our depth defenders here, we have Ray Fortin, who had a pretty short career that only lasted 92 games. Over that span though, he did pick up 8 points, was a +7, and had 35 penalty minutes. He was one of the shortest guys on the team, coming in at only 5'8", but generally the Blues were a really small team in comparison to the big bad Boston Bruins. And our final depth defender here is the third and the final Plager brother, that being Bill. Bill was also like his brothers, but he was a bit worse defensively, as Bill played 263 career games with 4 goals, 34 assists for 38 points. He was a career -62 and had 294 penalty minutes. He also played with Minnesota and Atlanta. Now in goal here we have Jacques Plante, who was already 41 at this point in time. He was still really fantastic, and he would still play in the NHL until he was 44, and then I think he also played a bit of one season at the age of 46 in the WHA. As I mentioned earlier, Plante missed the majority of this final with an injury due to a slap shot to the face mask. Jacques Plante had a lot of accolades over his career, mainly with the Montreal Canadiens. He won 6 Stanley Cups, 7 Vezinas, 1 Hart, and he also had 7 All-Star Games appearances. Not to mention his career numbers were pretty ridiculous, over 837 games. He went 437, 246, and 145, putting up 82 shutouts, a 2.38 goals against average, and a 920 save percentage, which is pretty good for this time because not a lot of goalies were really good back in these days. His backup is 38-year-old Glenn Hall, who was an elite goalie of his own for most part of his career. This kind of part he was kind of drying up a bit because he didn't play a lot during the regular season, and then in the playoffs he didn't really play that much either. However, most of his career was with the Blackhawks, where he was really good. Glenn played 906 career games with a 407, 326, and 164 record, 84 shutouts, a 2.5 goals against average, and a 918 save percentage. Also, which is kind of cool, his grandson Grant Stevenson actually played in the NHL in 05-06 with the San Jose Sharks. Glenn also won 1 Stanley Cup in 1961, which came with the Blackhawks, as I was kind of mentioning. He also went to 11 All-Star games, won the Calder in 1956, the Conn Smythe in 1968, and he also took home 3 Vezinas of his own. Now into the third goalie, and that was 29-year-old Ernie Walkley, or Walkley, I don't know how it's pronounced, but I think it's Walkley, could be wrong. Anyways, he was actually a pretty solid goaltender this season. He posted a 930 save percentage and a 2.11 goals against average in 30 games. However, in the postseasons, he was kind of ripped to shreds a bit, going 0-4-0 with a 4.74 goals against average and an 877 save percentage. Ernie had a short career that only lasted 113 games, going 41, 42, and 17 with 8 shutouts, a 2.78 goals against average, and a 907 save percentage. So he definitely wasn't as good as the other two, but he was still kind of solid nonetheless. Okay, so now that you guys know the St. Louis Blues, let's flip on over to the lines for the cup-winning Boston Bruins. Okay, so on the first line left wing here, we have Johnny Busick, who most of you guys should know from like Hockey Ultimate Team and all that sort of thing. Anyways, he was already 34 years old at this point in time, but that age did not really slow him down. He had 69 points in 76 games during the regular season, and he would also play in the NHL till he was 42. He would lace up in 1,540 games, which is quite a bit of games. I think it's probably up there for most games played. He scored 556 goals and added 813 assists for 1,369 points. He was also a career -7 and only took 493 penalty minutes. As doing so, he took home 2 Lady Bings. He also added 2 All-Star appearances, was a 2-time Stanley Cup champion, and then he was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1981. John also played in Detroit actually for his first 104 games in the NHL. The next 20 years he spent in Boston. At center here we have Phil Esposito, who was second on the team in points with 99 during the regular season, just behind Bobby Orr. He also led the team in goals with 43. Phil was a great scorer by the end of his career, as he played 1,282 games, scoring 717 goals, and then he also added 873 assists for 1,590 points, which puts him 10th all time. His 717 goals are 6th best in NHL history, behind the likes of Marcel Dion, Brett Hull, Jaromir Jagr, Gordie Howe, and Wayne Gretzky. Phil's brother Tony, as you should know, was a goaltender primarily for the Blackhawks, but he actually also had another relation to a player that played in the 90s, which a lot of you might not know because I didn't know. So he's actually related to former Russian player Alexander Selivanov, who is his son-in-law. So Selivanov actually married Phil's late daughter Carrie, who passed away in, I think it was earlier 2000s or the 90s or something. But yeah, anyways, Alexander Selivanov is related to Phil Esposito, which is pretty weird. Phil also won 2 Stanley Cups, 5 Art Rosses, 2 Pearsons, 2 Harts, and was an 8-time NHL All-Star. He was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1984. On the right side here, we have UK-born Ken Hodge Sr. Ken was one of 6 goal scorers on this team that had 20 or more. Over his career, he played in Chicago, Boston, and the Rangers. He played 880 career games with 328 goals, 472 assists for 800 points. He was also a career plus 260 and had 777 penalty minutes. So basically, this guy could pretty much do it all. Like, he could score goals, he could add assists, he could play good defensively, and then he could also take penalties when he needed to. His son Ken Hodge Jr. also also actually had a short career in the NHL where he played with Boston and Tampa Bay, but that only lasted 142 games. However, he did actually play pretty good during those 142 games, so he got kind of his skill from his father. On the second line here, we have Wayne Cashman, who is very physical, but also very good in both ends of the ice, offensively and defensively. Wayne played 1,027 games over his career, and he also scored 277 goals, added 516 assists for 793 points. He was a career plus 278 and had 1,039 penalty minutes. During this postseason alone, he had 50 penalty minutes in 14 games, which was actually second most on the team behind Derek Sanderson, who had like 72. At center here, we have Fred Stanfield, who, as I mentioned, is the guy that took the slap shot that hit Jacques Plante in like broke his mask. Fred also played with Chicago, Minnesota, and Buffalo before he ended his career. Over his 914 games, he scored 211 goals, added 405 assists for 616 points. He was also a career plus 50 and had only 134 penalty minutes. He was the most talented out of his family, as his brother Jack played 2 years in the WHA, and his brother Jim played only 7 NHL games with the Los Angeles Kings. On the right side here, we have John McKenzie, who played 692 games between 4 teams, including the Blackhawks, Red Wings, Rangers, and Bruins. After the 71-72 season, he actually left the NHL for the WHA, where he would play till 1978-79. He had 206 goals, 288 assists for 474 points in the NHL. He was also a plus 26 and had 923 penalty minutes. While when he was in the WHA, he played 477 games, added 163 goals, and a 250 assists for 413 points. He was also a career plus 65 and had 619 penalty minutes. John passed away last June at the age of 80. So yeah, this guy was very physical, but he was really good in both leagues that he played in. Next up on the third line here, we have Don Marcotte, who played 868 career games in the NHL, all with the Boston Bruins. Over that span, he had 230 goals, added 254 assists for 484 points. He was also a plus 191 and had 317 penalty minutes. His last NHL season came in 81-82 at the age of 34. At center here, we have 23-year-old Derek Sanderson, who was a very physical player, but could also produce really well. Sanderson played 598 career games with 202 goals, 250 assists for 452 points. He was a career plus 141 and had 911 penalty minutes. He won 2 cups in his career and took home the Calder as the top rookie in 1967-68. He also assisted on the Bobby Orr goal in overtime. Sanderson also played with the Rangers, the Blues, the Canucks, and the Penguins before he retired in 1977-78 at the age of 31. Next up is one of the assistant captains, that being right winger Ed Westfall. Westfall played 1,226 games between the Bruins and the Islanders. Over that span, he put up 231 goals, 394 assists for 625 points. He was also a career plus 82 and had 544 penalty minutes. He won the Masterton in 1976-77 while playing with the New York Islanders. On the fourth line here, we have Wayne Carlton, who had a short 278 game career. He played relatively well when he did play, putting up 55 goals, 73 assists for 128 points. He was also a career plus 9 and had 170 penalty minutes. He also played in Toronto and California before he would leave the NHL for the WHA in 1972-73. He would play there till he was 30 years old in 1976-77, but he was very successful in the WHA, putting up over a point per game with 312 points in 290 games. At center here, we have Jim Lorentz, who played only in 11 games of the 14 postseason games the Bruins played this season. He did score 1 goal during that span. Over his career, he played 659 games, scoring 161 goals, adding 238 assists for 399 points. He was also only a career plus 3, so he wasn't the greatest defensively, and he had 210 penalty minutes. He also played in St. Louis, Buffalo, and with the Rangers. And our final address forward is Bill Lasuk, who only played 2 games this postseason. I kind of had to just throw him in just because they wouldn't have had enough players otherwise. He also only played 3 games during the regular season, but he still got his name on the Stanley Cup, which is kind of weird. Bill would play with 4 other teams, including the Flyers, the Capitals, the Kings, and the Jets. Over his career, he played 388 games with 44 goals, 63 assists for 107 points. He was also a career minus 66, mainly due to his time in Washington, and he had also 368 penalty minutes. Because like when he was with Washington, I think he was there in their inaugural season, he was like a minus 33 because that team was horrific. So yeah, that's why he had such a bad plus minus. On to our only depth player, and that is Danny Schock, who only played 1 game this playoff run. He also didn't really play much in the NHL, playing only 20 career games. Over those 20 games, he had 1 goal, 2 assists for 3 points, but he never took a penalty during that span, so this guy was not really a physical player by any means. His brother Ron was more successful in the NHL, as Ron played 909 games with 517 points, playing in Boston, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, and Buffalo. Onto the top 2 pairing, we have Bobby Orr, who I really don't need to introduce, but I'm going to still go over some of his stats anyways. Bobby played 657 career games with Boston and Chicago, mainly due to injuries, because he suffered a few injuries that pretty much ended his career at like 31, I think it was, or 30. However, during that span, Bobby had 270 goals, 645 assists for 915 points. He was also an insane plus 582, which is pretty crazy for that amount of games. Like, he was literally plus every single game, it looks like. And to my surprise, he also put up 953 penalty minutes, which I really didn't know he was that physical of a player, but I guess he was kind of an all-around defender. Bobby took home 2 Conn Smythes in his 2 Stanley Cup wins. He also added the Calder in 1966-67. He also won 3 Harts, 8 Norris trophies, the Pearson in 1974-75, and 2 Art Ross trophies. He was also a 9-time All-Star in the 12 seasons that he played in the NHL. In his playoff career, he put up 92 points in 74 games, but the biggest one obviously had to be the Stanley Cup winning goal he scored this season. Next is his defense partner, and that is Don Awrey, who once went 153 games without a goal. Pretty surprising when you're next to Bobby Orr, but then again, I think it was some other player that got injured and missed the entire season. That was actually originally Bobby Orr's defense partner, but Awrey was kind of just like a replacement in that part. In 979 career games, Don had 31 goals, 158 assists for 189 points. He was also a career plus 94 and had 1,068 penalty minutes. Don also played in St. Louis, Montreal, Pittsburgh, New York, and Colorado. Next up on the top 4 here is Rick Smith, who won 1 cup in his career. He did play for Boston on 2 different stints, and then he also played in California, St. Louis, Detroit, and Washington. Rick played 687 career games with 52 goals, 167 assists for 219 points. He was also a career plus 181 and put up 558 penalty minutes. Rick retired at the end of the 80-81 season at the age of 32. Next is his defense partner, that is Dallas Smith, who has no relation to him, but both Smiths played together. Dallas was also a pretty good two-way defenseman, as over 889 games he put up 55 goals, added 252 assists for 307 points. He was also a career plus 318 and had 955 penalty minutes. He played his final NHL season with the New York Rangers before he retired in 1977-78. On the top 6 pairing here, we have Bill Spear, who had a short 130-game career with 25 points. He was a career minus 22 and had 79 penalty minutes, so he was pretty physical. He was more known for blocking his shots, and he also dealt with a bit of weight issues, as he was 205 pounds here, but he did gain a lot of weight in like the summer before this. Like, he was like 240 pounds according to this. That's according to Wikipedia at least. And he actually died back in 1989 at the age of 46 in a snowmobiling accident, which is pretty sad because this guy literally was driving a snowmobile on some thin ice and it felt like it cracked and he drowned. So pretty horrific way to go. And finally is his defensive partner, that is Gary Doak, who only played 8 games this playoff run, but I had to put him in anyways. Doak played in Detroit on 2 different stints, as well as in Vancouver and New York. Doak played 790 career games with 23 goals, 107 assists for 130 points. He was a career plus 124, so he was pretty good defensively, and he was also very physical with 908 penalty minutes. He passed away in the March of 2017 at the age of 71. Now into the men between the pipes here, we have another legend, that being Jerry Shevers. Jerry was pretty much the backbone to this cup win, as he would go 12-1 with a 2.23 goals against average and a 925 save percentage. He played only 418 career games, however he went 227, 104, and 76 with a 2.89 goals against average and a 901 save percentage. He played 2 games also with the Toronto Maple Leafs back in 61-62 where he started his career, and then he also had a brief stint in the WHA with the Cleveland Crusaders that lasted 4 years before he would return back to Boston to end his season, like his entire career in, like, I think it was almost 1980. I think it was maybe 1979 if I'm not mistaken. And finally, to finish up the Bruins roster here, we have the backup, and that is Eddie Johnston, or Ed Johnston. Ed played 592 games, going 236, 256, and 78. He had 32 shutouts, a 3.25 goals against average, and an 896 save percentage. He also played in Toronto, St. Louis, and Chicago. So yeah, he wasn't really the greatest goaltender. Losing record, pretty bad goals against, and a pretty bad that save percentage, but he did get 32 shutouts, so he was okay. He would retire at the age of 42 in 1977-78 after he did start his NHL career kind of late at the age of 27 in 1962-63. There were a couple other players that didn't play in the playoffs that also had their name on the cup that they did not make. First is Ivan Boldyrev, who actually played in the minors this entire season and didn't play a single NHL game, yet he still got his name on the cup, which is kind of weird. And then Ron Murphy, who played 20 games during the regular season, didn't play at all in the playoffs, but he got his name on the cup. Then also Garnet Bailey, who played 58 games during the regular season, for some reason did not play a single playoff game. I don't know if it was due to injury or what, but he got his name on the Stanley Cup as well. And finally, Ted Green, who was the guy that played with Bobby Orr for most of his career. He also missed the majority of the season. Well, he actually missed all the season. He played a bit of the preseason, but he got injured in the preseason. And then he also missed the playoffs because he suffered a really bad, horrific injury. As in the preseason when Boston was actually facing St. Louis, Ted Green and Wayne Mackey of the Blues were whacking their sticks at each other. And basically, Ted Green got a wooden stick to the back of the head. And yeah, both players were charged with assault because it was really that bad. So basically, Ted Green got a fractured skull and he had suffered brain damage because of the incident. He also had to have a metal plate put in the back of his head, while Wayne Mackey, I don't know how bad his injuries were, but I don't think he played much during the season either. Okay, so now that you guys know the rosters, let's get into the final simulation and see who comes out on top. Okay guys, let's get into this playoff simulation. So the St. Louis Blues, believe it or not, had home ice despite finishing lower in the standings than the Bruins, just because the Bruins finished second in the Eastern Conference while the St. Louis Blues finished first in the Western Conference. So for some reason they got home ice out of this series. So yeah, let's get into game number 1 at the St. Louis Arena and see if the St. Louis Blues can upset the Bruins, or will the Bruins prevail and win the cup. First period, and it is 1-0 for the Blues. Ab McDonald getting on the board for the Blues. Shots are 10-9 in favor of Boston. Second period, and it is a tie game now. Wayne Cashman beats Jacques Plante. Shots are pretty close, 18-17, and we have a tie game. So this is anybody's game going into the third. Who will come through with the game-winning goal here in this third period? Power play for Boston. They don't score on it. Final 10 minutes here of this third period. Are we going to be going to overtime in game 1? Penalty kill for Boston. They killed off. And we are going to OT. Shots are still pretty tight, 25-24. Who is going to be the OT hero? Is it going to be Bobby Orr, just like it happened in 1970, but this time it would be in game 1. Almost halfway through overtime, and we still don't have a goal, and there is a goal from Johnny Busick. The big guy comes through, and the Boston Bruins have taken a tight one by a score of 2-1. So despite St. Louis scoring first, Boston answered back with 2 of their own. So if I'm the St. Louis Blues, that's not a good game because you don't want to let their big guys starting to get going, because Orr, Esposito, Hodge, and Busick all had points in that game. So maybe they're going to be looking for more next game. So Achievers gets the first star, Plante the second star, and McDonald gets the third star. Okay, so realistic start to this series. Obviously, with Boston won game 1 in real life, and they won all 4 games. So will the St. Louis Blues manage to win a game at all in the simulation? It should be pretty close because they do have a very good defensive core and goaltender. First period of game number 2, and it is 1-0 Boston. So this time Boston gets on the board first. Shots are 11 apiece. Derek Sanderson with the goal. Second period, and it is still 1-0. So this might be a really defensive series, despite the real series being kind of like an offensive explosion for the Bruins. Shots are 23 apiece, but it is 1-0 for the Bruins. Let's see what happens here in the third. Getting close to the halfway point of this third period. Blues have a power play, but they don't score, and Derek Sanderson puts home his second of the night. Power play for the Blues, and they managed to score on it. Andre Boudre pulls the Blues within 1. Shots are still pretty tight. Will the Blues tie it? And no, they won't. And the Blues lose both of their home games, which is not a good sign, going back to Boston. They're going to have to win 2 road games in order to have a tight series again. So Derek Sanderson from Don Awrey I think it's Don Awrey and Don Marcotte, so 3 Ds there. Derek Sanderson from Rick Smith and Wayne Cashman, and an Andre Boudreaux from Larry Keenan and Jimmy Roberts. 3 stars in that game: Shevers again, Sanderson, and Jacques Plante. So it looks like Jerry Shevers is the difference right now in the series. He's only letting 1 goal, was it, or 2 goals? Yeah, 2 goals in 2 games, I think. Okay, so here we go. We're moving the series to Boston in the Boston Garden. Will the Boston Bruins take a commanding 3-0 series lead, or will the Blues win a game? First period, and it's 1-0 St. Louis. An early goal from Frank St. Mercier has the Blues on the board. Shots are heavily in Boston's favor, though, 15-6. Let's see if Boston can come through here in the second period, and it's 2-0 Blues now. Wow. Norm Dennis, who, as I said earlier, only had like 3 NHL goals, and he played less than 100 NHL games. Somehow he gets on the board to make it a 2-0 game for the Blues. Shots are 24-16 in favor of the Bruins. Let's see what happens here in the third. But it looks like the Blues are going to take a game in this series, which is something they didn't do in real life. Final 10 minutes of the third period. Blues are just locking it down. A good performance from Jacques Plante. And the St. Louis Blues are going to take a game on the road by a score of 2-0. It's pretty surprising. It seems like it's been a goaltending duel right now in the playoffs. So St. Mercier from Goyette and McDonald and Dennis unassisted. Okay. 3 stars in that game: Jacques Plante the first star, Jerry Shevers the second star, and Frank St. Mercier the third. Okay, so will the Blues be able to tie the series and maybe have some new life headed back home, or will the Boston Bruins take a 3-1 single hold? Let's see what happens here in game number 4. Bobby Orr has been not really anywhere at this point. Nobody has really. First period, and it's 2-0 Boston. Bill Lasuk, another guy that didn't really even play that much in the playoffs, somehow gets on the board. Weird. And Johnny Busick scores to make it 2-0 Bruins after 1. Shots are 11-6 in favor of Boston. Second period, and it's 3-0 Boston. Ed Westfall scores. And this series is looking closer and closer to being over. That is if St. Louis can't come back from a deficit like that. And Derek Sanderson makes it 4-0. Sanderson's been really good. St. Mercier gets the Blues on the board, but it's not a match really for Boston's offense. Final 5 minutes, power play for the Bruins, and they score another Ken Hodge. Pretty realistic game because Boston would score, I think it was 6 goals they scored in game number 1. So yeah, that's pretty realistic. We get our first rout of the series. So Lasuk from Carlton and Lawrence. That's a 4th line goal. Busick from Doak and Hodge. Westfall from Spear and Marcotte. Sanderson from Cashman and Stanfield. And Mercier from Goyette and McDonald, and Hodge from Doak. Okay. 3 stars in that game. Shevers again. He's been really good this series. Ken Hodge the second star, and Gary Doak the third. So somehow Doak, I think, has more points than Bobby Orr, so I have no idea why that's happening, because Doak's a top 6 defenseman, and then Bobby Orr's a 93, so it makes no sense really. But let's see if the Boston Bruins could win a Stanley Cup in St. Louis, or will the Blues force a Game 6? I'm assuming Boston's going to get it done, though, just because they obviously have the offensive upper hand. First period, and it's 2-0 Boston. Busick and Carlson. Damn, that 4th line for Boston's been really good in the series. And Johnny Busick puts up a goal. Shots are 13-9 in favor of the Bruins. Second period, and it's 2-2. Okay. So St. Louis answers back with 2 unanswered. Phil Goyette and Norm Dennis again. I don't know why he's scoring so much because he's a 77 overall, but okay. So we have a tied game going into the third. Shots are 26-16. Let's see what happens here in the third. If Boston has a chance to win the cup, we'll intervene and I'll let you guys watch or whatever. Power play for St. Louis, and they go ahead. One of the Plager brothers gets on the board. Okay. So St. Louis rallying from a 2-0 deficit to take a 3-2 lead in this game. Power play for the Bruins. And they are not going to score on it, and the St. Louis Blues have fought off elimination as we headed back to Boston, where the Bruins have a chance to win the Stanley Cup. So Busic's third from Esposito and Hodge, Carlson from Lawrence and Smith, Goyette from McDonald and Roberts, Dennis from Gray and McCreary, and Plager from McDonald and Goyette. Yeah, I don't know which Plager that was that scored. I'd assume it's Barclay, but I could be wrong. So Plante gets first star, Goyette the second star, and Plager the third. So this is not a really realistic simulation. Like I said, Boston actually swept the Stanley Cup Finals. So St. Louis looking to force a Game 7, which would be pretty crazy. If not, the Boston Bruins have a chance to win a Stanley Cup on home ice like they did in 1970. First period, and it is 1-1. Derek Sanderson again gets on the board, and Goyette ties the game. Shots are 15-8 in favor of the Blues. Second period, and Boston's got the lead. Phil Esposito finally comes through, making it a 2-1 game. Let's see what happens here in the third. Will the Bruins hold them off and win the Stanley Cup? Noel Picard, trying to make up for his Bobby Orr trip at the end, scores a goal to tie this game up. I'm going to go down to 4-time simulation just in case there's a goal from Boston or not. We might have to watch overtime. That would be crazy if it actually goes to an overtime. Final 5 minutes of this third period. Time is winding down. And yes, we are going to overtime. So I'm going to let you guys watch overtime just in case Boston wins the Stanley Cup in overtime like they technically did in 1970. And then I'll see you guys pretty much back up here at the end of it with a little recap. So yeah, I'll see you guys in a second.
If you're just with us, it's been a tremendous bit of hockey so far and more to come. We have started overtime. Ray Ferraro is closest to the action. Eddie Olczyk alongside Mike Emmer. Handled in the corner by Orr. Trying to go to McDonald. And he's tripped, and there'll be a penalty. Success already. This is the one they need.
They've already had some success on the power play with a power play goal earlier in the game. They don't have to change much. Make sure you move the puck quickly and get traffic to the front of the net.
Neutralize. Didn't go very well there. Who comes up with it? Wow, what a glove save. Solid, clean win. A giveaway. Skill play by McDonald. Save. Oh, and the pass wouldn't go. One-timer. Gonged away. Brings it in for an attack. Just couldn't find the target. Good intercept in his own end. Looking to end it. A shot. Did not miss by much. Muscled right off. Loose puck couldn't drag it through. Oh, what a terrific save in close.
Unless you score in many different categories.
Shooting. A terrific scoring chance denied. Eats it into the zone. Long lead pass to Talbot. Perfect tip by the stick. Laid on to McCarron. Shoots. Wonderful save. It didn't look like he had a thing to shoot at. Propelled to Bear. Fires a shot. Had the goalie beat and glanced it off the post. Start something. Up the wing and still with it. One-timer. He missed the net.
He doesn't miss it by much.
Saint-Jacques is tripped up. That should be a penalty. Edge on the power play, but when you do get one, that makes the biggest difference. That might be the case right here this time. Outstanding save with a glove. A very big face-off win here. Okay. Got a piece of that one. He got that one too. Muscled long to Saint-Jacques. off the crossbar. A terrific bumpy road to the end of a marvelous game. At least one more dramatic face-off. Boston's in control of the puck in the defensive zone. Gets across, looks over his options. Fires. Loose puck, not stick-handled well there. Point. Lets it go. They can't find the target. That puck's loose. A good defensive play. Chip to Hodges. Score! It's over! It's over! In overtime, it's over the Stanley Cup. What a finish! A fitting tribute to a wonderful season. Training camp in September was a dream. For this team, it is a nightmare. They got so far. We'll have the same short summer, but nothing to show for it.
As you shake hands at the end of a series, you see the players say a few words to each other. Some are ex-teammates, some know each other from growing up, and yet some are just congratulating the winners on an excellent series.
The playoff MVP gets the Conn Smythe Trophy, and here is the winner.
This is a tremendous award that probably means more in the coming days than it does now. You don't dream of winning the Conn Smythe. You dream of the Stanley Cup.
It's often said it's the hardest prize to win because it takes 8 weeks. And by tradition, the captain is the first to hold it high.
He's often acknowledged to be one of the best captains in all of sport. To be the leader of a championship team is one thing. To be held on a different level as he is quite another. There's so much going on the ice right now. I wonder if the players are able to soak it all in, or if it goes by so fast that the time that they really understand is when they look at it on video later on. This is outstanding to see how happy these players are.
You play that hard and that long. You get your names on a trophy, rings on your fingers, and one last photograph. Evidence of it all.
Okay, that was a little dumb. Why did they give it to Bill Suk when he got the cup? Like, really? Out of everybody on the team, like, Boston didn't actually have a captain this season, so they should have given it to the alternates, but for some reason they just gave it to Bill Suk, who's a fourth liner on this team, so that's kind of weird. But at least Bobby Orr got to skate around with the Stanley Cup at the end of it as well. So Jerry Sheaver is getting the Conn Smythe and the first star in that game. Johnny Busick the second star, and Ken Hodge the third. I think it was Busick with the OT winner, right? So Cashman just makes a great play, opens up the ice. Hodge with a shot to the net. Yep, this nice deflection in front by Johnny Busick is the winner as he deflects it right under the arm of Jacques Plante, and this trickles in, and the Boston Bruins win the Stanley Cup in overtime on home ice like they did in 1970, except for this time in 6 games. Okay, so let's finally just do a little end of the series wrap up. Take a look at the player stats throughout all the teams, or the 2 teams. See who did what. So let's go there. Okay, so Phil Goyette and Adam McDonald were the best players in that Stanley Cup Finals, 7 points in 6 games each. So surprisingly, St. Louis does not win the cup with those 2 doing so well. Ken Hodge had 6 points, so he was the best Boston Bruin forward. Then you had Johnny Busick, Derek Sanderson, Wayne Cashman, and then Frank St. Marseille, Esposito, etc. Where the hell is Bobby Orr? Orr only had 1 assist. That's a little strange. Not really realistic, but oh well, at least they still won the Stanley Cup. Goalie-wise, Jerry Shevers was 4-2 with a .951 save percentage and a 1.38 goals against average, while Jacques Plante was 2-2 with 1 shutout, a .930 save percentage and a 2.14 goals against average. So he was really good as well. Like, he probably would have been the player to win the Conn Smythe if the St. Louis Blues won the Stanley Cup. Okay guys, that is pretty much going to wrap up this Stanley Cup Finals rematch episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and yeah, let me know what you guys think down below. Who do you think is going to win the 2019 Stanley Cup Finals version of this? I know I want St. Louis, but I feel like Boston's more experienced in this kind of idea, because St. Louis doesn't have a lot of players that have playoff experience down that far. Well, actually, in Stanley Cup Finals, none of them have any experience really. But anyways, let me know what you guys think about this down below. And also, do you guys still want to see the 2003 Stanley Cup Finals in next episode or what? Let me know down below in the comments. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.